Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of June 3rd. I'm Michael James, I'm here in Chicago, and for the rest of our show, we're gonna talk with someone who has been inspirational to many with his music, his understanding, his grasp of the blues and more. Coming home to Chicago, Barry Goldberg. Hello, Barry.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm good. So last week we had a couple of fellows on named John Anderson and Bob Sarles, who you know well, and they are the directors and producers of this new movie, Born in Chicago, which is about the passing of the torch, so to speak, or the coming together of the blues masters and the young fellows running around the city at that time who got to know them, appreciate them, and learn some of their licks. You're coming back. You're going to play a couple of concerts. We'll give those at the end. And the movie that you're in is going to be shown at the Cultural Center on Friday, but I think it's sold out already. Well, let's do this. Are you excited about coming home?
I'm always excited about coming home, and Chicago is my home, and I'm a fan of all the Chicago sports teams. Never really got into Los Angeles that much, California, although I've been here for almost over 45 years. But every time I get to come home to see my friends and my family, it's amazing. It's wonderful for me.
Well, it's a great town, and we wish you'd been moved back here maybe, but I got to say that I grew up a Brooklyn Dodger fan, but I can never get into the Los Angeles Dodgers. I'm sticking with the White Sox, a little bit of Cubs, and the rest of the teams. So when you come back, you're going to be, they're going to show this movie that you did some of the actual soundtrack for, the music, along with Jimmy Vivino. Tell us about the music and the movie Born in Chicago.
Well, it was a concept that I thought of with a couple of the other guys that are survivors of that period when we were teenagers, and we would discover that music on the radio. And it was bad enough for our families that we were into rock and roll, but the blues was a whole other element. And it just was, when I first heard it, it was WGES, Jam with Sam Evans. I heard his theme song, Little Walter's Blue Lights, and that just freaked me out and took me to another world, another planet. And it was sort of like my passport for freedom at that time, because I was sort of a misfit, you know, not able to go to my regular high school, had to leave 2 or 3 different high schools. So not knowing it, but there were others like myself, and we all sort of gathered at Jazz Record Mart and a couple other record stores and discovered our love of this music called the blues. And it was in our own backyard at that time. It was a special time in Chicago where the artists were Muddy Waters and Howling Wolf and Little Walter. And we just had to find out firsthand where this music was coming from.
I remember in 1962, I was going to Lake Forest College, and I was doing a paper on the socialization of the Negro jazz musician or something. And I had read an article in Downbeat about reverse prejudice in jazz. And so I went to some clubs, you know, and I talked to different people. I talked to Ira Sullivan, but I also met Charlie Musselwhite in the basement at the Jazz Record Mart down below Roosevelt University on Wabash there. And maybe I bumped into you there too, who knows?
That's quite possible. Charlie and I did with Harvey Mandel and Fred Belo and Little Bob Anderson, we did an album together called Stand Back.
Oh, yeah. You got, tell our listeners and our viewers some of the other bands that you were in. I mean, you worked with Steve Miller. You had the Goldberg Steve Miller Band. You had the Two Jews Blues Band. Tell us about some of those groups and how you met Mike Bloomfield, who I actually met at that same time, too, when he brought some blues artists to Lake Forest College.
Yeah, Michael was an entrepreneur at that time. At 16, we met. We were in rival bands and vying for who would do the next Sweet 16 parties. And we'd play for all over high schools, and it was a rock and roll band primarily. But that's when we first met, and then we met later on at a high school that we were going to called Central
Oh
YMCA,
yeah.
downtown Chicago.
Yeah, where all the kids who got kicked out of the other schools ended up.
We all wound up in Central Y. First, there was Bateman, which was a private school for delinquents, and then there was the Central YMCA. So Michael and I became instant friends, and he turned me on. He took me out of, you don't belong on Rush Street, you belong on Old Town. And then we started hanging out together on Wells Street, and then he said, "Why don't we come on down to the South Side and West Side, and we can maybe strike out these relationships with the old masters." At that time, there were the young masters, Howling Wolf and Muddy Waters and Otis Rush, and we formed relationships and eventually got to sit in with them.
That's great. And have you stayed friends with any of them who's alive or any of their kids?
Well, Nick Gravenitis and I are really good friends. Corky Siegel is a good friend of mine.
Yeah, I see.
Charlie Musselwhite is, we're very close, and Harvey Mandel, of course. And we had a band called the Chicago Blues Reunion together. And the legendary late great Sam Lay occasionally played drums with us. And we have a couple of CDs out that we work together.
I think I read that you had played at the Newport Folk Festival with Dylan, and I think that would that have been the time when everyone got Pete Seeger and other folks were outraged that Dylan won Electric. Was that the same time you played with him? And can you share what that was like?
Yeah, that was. I originally came asked to play with the Butterfield band, Paul Butterfield, and Paul. Yeah. We all went to Newport, Rhode Island from Chicago, and we all left and we drove in the car. It was quite a road trip. And then when we got there, Paul had a producer. His name was Paul Rothschild. And Rothschild said, "I'm sorry, but no keyboards in this band. I don't hear keyboards. I'm a piano player." So I didn't have a gig at that time. And I was left really stranded without a gig in a strange place until Michael introduced me to Bob Dylan, who was there to do something really new and different in his career. He was going to plug in and go electric amongst an all folk crowd. That was really a controversial thing to do in his career, but it was very controversial. Most of the people were not used to it and didn't accept it. But what Bob did at that moment when we played, and I got to play keyboards with him along with Al Cooper, Sam Lay was on drums, Jerome Arnold from the Butterfield Band was on bass, and Mike Bloomfield was a guitar player. So he created at that moment folk rock. And it was a real magical high moment in my career.
What do you remember about the crowd? Were they mostly panning, or were they? I would imagine a lot of people liked it.
It was about 50-50.
Yeah.
And the people that couldn't accept it because they knew they had sensed that not the end had come, but it was an ending of a certain era for them. And Bob, they felt betrayed by Bob, but Bob took the next step in his career, which thank God he did.
Yeah.
And it became electric rock, folk rock.
Yeah, that was great. Lynn Orman is our music producer for this show, and I know you know Lynn, and she told me to ask you about growing up at Foster and Sheridan, and to talk a little bit about your mom, who was in Yiddish theater. Can you share a little bit of that time in your life?
Yes, of course. My mother was born on Maxwell Street. Maxwell and Halsted, and then she went to grammar school there. And then later on met my father. They were both working at Western Union. and they got together. And a few years later, I came along, and I was actually born in Albany Park for the first 6 months of my life. Then we moved to Sheridan Road in Foster. And she was a piano player, and she appeared on the Yiddish stage in her younger days. She was comparable to the New York version, who was Molly Picon, and another famous Yiddish actress. And my mother just couldn't handle it, like nerve-wise, so she left the Yiddish stage to marry my father, and kept playing the piano and singing. And eventually, that's where I got my piano chops from. She was a stride barrel house Nettie, they called her, Nettie Goldberg. And we would play duets on the piano together when I was 5. And that's basically, they had some records in the house that I listened to, and I really was turned on by Meade Lux Lewis, the boogie woogie piano player. And of course, Otis Spann became my hero and my idol. And Johnny Johnson taught me a little bit of my left hand, how to move it along a little better than I was doing it.
I remember Otis Spann. I remember seeing him. He's one of the people that Mike Bloomfield brought to Lake Forest College in the early 60s, Otis Spann and St. Louis Jimmy, as I recall. And I don't know any more about it than that. That's all I remember.
St. Louis Jimmy, that's amazing, because he's from St. Louis. No, I never heard that before. That's great.
I don't know. That's what I remember. And sometimes it's still good, and you never know, though.
You never know when it's going to work.
That's the truth. Now, Barry, you have a new band, I hear, and you're going to be playing, I think, with your new band, along with a fellow named Rob Stone, a couple of gigs next weekend. You want to tell us about your new band and how it came to be?
Yes, it's a band we play looking for people that have soulful chops around Los Angeles. And it was a hard search, believe me, because it's a different kind of style of music. So I'm looking for rock and roll people that can play the blues. And Jimmy Vivino fit right in, and he's a great guitar player. And Rob Stone is like one of the best harp players I've heard in a long, long time. I call him Rob Stone with the big boss tone.
Nice.
And we're going to be playing some concerts together when we get to Chicago. Rob is a young kid who didn't grow up in Chicago, but knows more about Chicago and Little Walter and Sonny Boy than a lot of blues harp players.
Oh, great. I'm going to be out of town next weekend, so I'm not going to get to come hear you, but I'm going to, hopefully I do it another time. Let me just run over the things that I've got down that I want to share with the listeners, that there is a showing of the film Born in Chicago on Friday, June 9th in the afternoon at the Cultural Center, but I think it's sold out, although it is going to be streamed, and I'm not sure how one does that. Then on the day before, on Thursday, Barry and I think Rob Stone will be doing a broadcast and interview with someone named Leslie Quiros at a place called Piano Forte, 1335 Michigan Avenue. And then on Friday night after the Blues Festival, around 9:30 at Reggie's, 2105 South State Street, you're going to be featured along with the Chicago Blues Super Session Band, which includes Billy Flynn, Bob Stroger, Kenny Beady Eyes Smith, Dave Katzman, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago, Melvin Smith, Roosevelt Purifoy, Omar Coleman, Oscar Wilson, and Amy Lowe, who was on the show a few weeks ago. How's that for a lot of work for you? Are they going to be able to keep up with all that? How's your health and stuff these days?
I'm in training right now, boot camp. My wife is a drill instructor.
They're good for that. I mean, they're wonderful for many reasons, but they're also, as guys get older, I know I'm a little bit older than my wife, and she's a pretty good drill instructor. What did I not ask you that you really think is important and pertinent that you want to share with your hometown folks here and beyond? give us a little bit of your wisdom, your views on the world, your hopes, your aspirations, whatever you'd like to share.
Well, everywhere I wander, everywhere I roam, I always keep in my heart that Chicago is my home.
I like that. You ever do that to a tune?
No,
Maybe
but
now.
that's how I feel. I get excited. This is the town where my father was born, and my grandfather came when he was an immigrant from Russia, and they all settled in Chicago. And I have relatives in Elgin, Illinois, and all over the place, and friends from high school that are coming to the gig too. You know, all my old buddies, and it's more than just a reunion. It's a moment where my heart is fulfilled with love and enjoyment.
Oh, that's great. And do you plan to, after your weekend of heavy duty here in Chicago, you're going to take it any other places? You got any other events lined up beyond Chicago?
Well, in Chicago, the first stop is Al's Beef.
You know, there's a new, I think there's a new series on one of those TV stations called The Bear, and it's about a Italian beef shop.
Oh yeah, I
Check
know
it out.
that. I get really homesick every time I watch that. But that right after I get off the plane, the driver's going to take us to Al's Beef in Little Italy.
All right. Well, you enjoy that, and you keep on cranking out this wonderful music. And I do have a photograph I took of James Cotton and Muddy Waters. I don't know who was playing with him. I always think it was Corky Siegel, and I'm not sure who it was. It was at a place called the Fat Black Pussycat in '62. Do you have any memory of that place?
No, I don't. But Michael and I produced a James Cotton album called The Verve Years. James Cotton and Verve, and James was a beautiful person. We loved him. That was a really good record too.
Yeah, I last time I saw him was up at Space. He was playing up there. It's probably 5 years ago, but maybe a little longer. Anyhow, it's really an honor to have you on the Live from the Heartland show. I'm going to encourage all my friends and people to go out and check you out while you're here in Chicago. I'm sorry that I won't be able to go, but I'll be having a pretty good time in El Paso. And
well, have a great time, Michael, and hopefully one day we'll meet.
yeah, we will. I got your email now, so look out. You'll be getting all kind of propaganda from me.
That's cool.
Okay, brother.